I have been writing for about 17 years, since 2008. And this one is a book of short stories.
When people think of Britain's Got Talent, one of the first names that comes to mind is David Walliams. With his sharp humor, infectious laugh, and sometimes cheeky comments, he became a familiar face to millions of viewers across the UK and beyond. For over a decade, David was not just a judge. He was part of the heartbeat of the show, balancing Simon Cowell's seriousness with his own playful charm. On screen, he appeared larger than life, always quick with a joke or a heartfelt compliment to a nervous contestant. To the public, David seemed untouchable, successful, wealthy, and adored by fans of all ages. But behind the cameras, away from the glitz of television lights and the roar of the audience, David Walliams' story has been far from perfect. In fact, his life has been shaped by a series of personal battles, heartbreaking struggles, and controversies that very few expected. What seemed like a man who had it all was actually someone fighting demons that the world rarely saw. From painful childhood memories to mental health struggles that nearly consumed him, David's journey has been marked by moments of deep sadness hidden beneath the mask of comedy. Now, as headlines continue to reveal more about his time after Britain's Got Talent, fans are left wondering, who is the real David Walliams when the cameras stop rolling? This is the tragic and heartbreaking story of a man who made millions laugh while silently carrying his own pain, a story that proves fame and success do not shield anyone from life's darkest battles. David Walliams. Born David Edward Williams in London in 1971, grew up in what many might call an ordinary British household. But for young David, life was anything but ordinary. From an early age, he felt different, creative, sensitive, and often misunderstood. His childhood, while filled with moments of imagination and play, was also marked by struggles that would shape him for the rest of his life. David's parents were supportive but lived modestly. His father, an engineer with the London Transport Authority, worked long hours, while his mother dedicated herself to raising him and his sister. David often found comfort in humor, escaping into impressions, stories, and characters of his own creation. But alongside this creative spark came a deep sense of insecurity. As a young boy, David struggled with feelings of isolation, sensing that he didn't quite fit in with his peers. School life was particularly challenging. David wasn't the most athletic child, and his sensitivity often made him a target for teasing. The cruelty of other children left lasting scars, though he rarely let it show. Instead, he turned to comedy and performance as a shield. Making people laugh became his defense mechanism, a way to protect himself from ridicule while also gaining the acceptance he craved. In later interviews, David admitted that comedy became a form of survival for him. At the same time, David carried within him another burden, a secret struggle with his mental health. Even as a child, he felt waves of sadness and anxiety that he couldn't fully explain. Back then, mental health wasn't discussed as openly as it is today, and so David often carried this weight silently. These early battles planted the seeds for the depression he would later face as an adult. Despite these challenges, David's passion for performing only grew stronger. He was drawn to storytelling, comedy sketches, and television shows, watching and studying how entertainers could hold an audience in the palm of their hand. Inspired by these figures, David began to dream of a life in the spotlight, even though it felt far out of reach for a boy from suburban London. By his teenage years, David was already showing signs of the talent that would later make him famous. He wrote plays, performed in school productions, and experimented with creating characters that could both amuse and disarm people. His ability to slip into roles allowed him not only to entertain, but also to hide parts of himself he wasn't ready to share with the world. When he eventually attended the University of Bristol to study drama, David found himself surrounded by people who finally understood his creative drive. It was there that he began to refine his craft, and it was also there that he met Matt Lucas, the man who would later become his comedy partner in Little Britain. But even as new opportunities opened, David's personal insecurities and inner battles followed him. Looking back on his early years, it's clear that David Walliams' childhood was a mixture of light and dark. On one hand, he had supportive parents and a growing passion for comedy. On the other, he faced ridicule, isolation, and the first hints of depression. These experiences didn't just shape his career. They shaped the man he would become. They gave him the empathy to connect with others. But they also left him with wounds that fame and success would never fully heal. The David Walliams that audiences later saw on television, the witty, confident, and larger-than-life figure, was born out of this early struggle. He had learned that making people laugh could cover up sadness, and that comedy could be both an escape and a weapon. But behind the laughter was still the little boy searching for belonging, a boy who never quite stopped carrying his pain. David Walliams may have appeared as the life of the party on Britain's Got Talent, flashing his trademark smile and cracking outrageous jokes. But beneath that polished exterior was a man grappling with deep internal battles. Fame, while rewarding, often comes with an invisible cost, something Walliams knew all too well. The bright stage lights, the roaring laughter, and the adoration of millions could not mask the darker truths lurking behind closed doors. From the very beginning of his career, David understood that comedy was his shield. As a child, he had always been the funny one, the boy who could make a room light up with his wit. But this role became more than just a childhood trait. It grew into a survival mechanism. He learned that if he could make people laugh, he could deflect attention from his insecurities. Yet this coping mechanism evolved into a double-edged sword. By constantly being the entertainer, David rarely allowed anyone to see his vulnerability. When he joined Britain's Got Talent as a judge in 2012, Walliams became an instant fan favorite. His playful banter with Simon Cowell, his affectionate teasing of contestants, and his ability to bring levity to tense moments added a spark the show desperately needed. To the public, he looked like the epitome of confidence, but friends close to him noticed a different story unfolding. Behind the television persona was a man weighed down by loneliness and private turmoil. Walliams has spoken openly about his struggles with depression, describing it as a shadow that would creep in when the spotlight dimmed. At times, he felt crushed by the pressure to maintain the David Walliams brand, the cheeky, lovable, flamboyant figure adored by audiences. But that performance often came at the expense of his mental well-being. When filming wrapped and the cameras stopped rolling, he was left alone with thoughts he tried desperately to silence. His personal relationships also bore the brunt of this silent struggle. Although David had moments of deep connection, most famously his marriage to model Lara Stone, his inner battles sometimes created distance. Their eventual divorce in 2015 was a painful turning point in his life. While both tried to maintain dignity in public, friends revealed how devastated David was behind the scenes. His love for his son Alfred gave him a sense of purpose, but the breakdown of his marriage left a scar that took years to mend. Work, however, never stopped. He poured himself into writing children's books, which became a massive success. Millions of copies sold worldwide, and critics praised his ability to create quirky, imaginative stories that captured the hearts of young readers. For Walliams, writing was more than just a career, it was therapy. By channeling his creativity into storytelling, he found a way to express the emotions he couldn't always voice in real life. His characters, often outsiders or underdogs, reflected pieces of himself. Still, even with professional triumphs, David often felt caught between two worlds, the world where he was idolized and adored, and the private world where doubts and sadness often consumed him. Fame magnified this tension. On one hand, the applause fed his confidence. On the other, it reminded him of the impossible standard he had to maintain. The tragic irony of David Walliams's life was that the man who brought joy to millions often struggled to find joy for himself. Those closest to him understood that his humor was a mask, and while it served him well, it also isolated him. Opening up about mental health was brave, but it also exposed him to public scrutiny. In interviews, he admitted that sharing his struggles made him feel vulnerable, yet he hoped it would help others facing similar battles. That willingness to speak out revealed not just the entertainer, but the human being beneath the spotlight, a man searching for balance between laughter and truth. By the time Britain's Got Talent reached its peak, Walliams had become a national treasure. Yet, the higher he climbed, the more fragile the foundation beneath him seemed. The fame, the accolades, the fortune, none of it shielded him from the weight of his personal demons. As David Walliams's fame continued to soar, so did the scrutiny. While audiences adored his flamboyant humor and sharp wit on Britain's Got Talent, not everyone appreciated his larger-than-life personality. For every cheer, there seemed to be a chorus of critics waiting to tear him down. And as the years passed, controversies began to pile up, threatening to overshadow the very career that had made him a household name. One of the first cracks in the facade came from his off-the-cuff jokes on BGT. David was known for pushing boundaries, often directing playful banter at Simon Cowell or making over-the-top comments that sent the audience roaring with laughter. But not everyone saw the humor. Some accused him of going too far, blurring the line between comedy and cruelty. Headlines occasionally labeled him inappropriate or attention-seeking, painting a very different picture than the beloved family-friendly figure seen by children. Reading his books, this growing criticism came to a head when old. Recordings of his behind-the-scenes conversations were leaked to the press. In these private exchanges, David was heard making crude remarks about contestants and even joking about other judges. Though the comments were made off-camera and never intended for public consumption, the leaks sent shockwaves through the media. Suddenly, the same man celebrated for his kindness and humor was being portrayed as arrogant, insensitive, and even mean-spirited. The backlash was swift. Tabloids had a field day, and social media amplified the outrage. Fans who had once idolized him expressed disappointment, while others defended him, pointing out that comedians have always thrived on pushing boundaries. Yet for David, the damage was undeniable. It wasn't just his career on BGT that took a hit, it was his sense of self. The controversy struck at the very core of the identity he had built, the entertainer who brought joy to millions. What made matters worse was the timing. David was already wrestling with his own insecurities and depression, and the added weight of public criticism deepened his struggles. Friends described him as withdrawn, embarrassed, and consumed by regret. In interviews, he admitted that fame had a cruel side, one where your mistakes, even private ones, could define you in the public eye. At the same time, his personal life remained complicated. Despite his success as an author and television personality, David still yearned for stability and deeper connection. His role as a father to Alfred remained the anchor in his life, yet even parenthood could not shield him from the harsh glare of the media. Every move, every relationship, every joke he made seemed to be dissected by tabloids looking for scandal. The controversies also exposed the double standards faced by comedians in modern entertainment. Once celebrated for being bold and outrageous, David suddenly found himself in a climate where those same traits were under fire. What audiences had laughed at a decade earlier was now being viewed through a harsher, less forgiving lens. This left Walliams at a crossroads. Should he tone down his humor and risk losing what made him unique, or continue being unapologetically himself and endure the criticism? To many fans, the answer was clear. David Walliams was still the same man they loved, flaws and all. But for David, the struggle to reconcile his public image with his private self only deepened. The man who had once hidden behind comedy was now being forced to confront not only his inner demons, but also the way the world perceived him. What is perhaps most tragic is that the controversies overshadowed the incredible good he had done. His charity work, his record-breaking children's books, and his impact on BGT were undeniable. Yet in the brutal world of fame, one scandal can often outweigh a lifetime of achievements. By the late 2010s, it was clear that David's time on Britain's Got Talent was nearing its end. The tension behind the scenes, the relentless criticism, and the exhaustion of keeping up appearances were taking their toll. Though he tried to maintain his usual charm on screen, insiders noticed the difference. The once effortless performer now seemed drained, his laughter not quite as loud, his energy dimmed. David Walliams was at a breaking point. The controversies didn't just test his career, they tested his resilience, his friendships, and his very sense of identity. For a man who had spent his entire life making others laugh, the cruelest irony was that he often found it hardest to make himself smile. By the time David Walliams officially stepped away from Britain's Got Talent, it was more than the end of a television chapter. It was the closing of an era in British entertainment. For over a decade, David had been one of the show's defining personalities, injecting humor, warmth, and unpredictability into a format that relied heavily on personality. Yet behind the curtain, the decision to leave was not so much a choice as it was a necessity. The controversies and personal battles that had haunted him in the final years of BGT had left scars. Friends close to him revealed that David was exhausted from trying to live up to the impossible expectations placed upon him. For years, he had juggled the demands of television, writing, and public appearances, all while navigating the turbulence of his private life. The laughter that once defined him had started to feel like a mask he could no longer wear. Stepping away from the judge's desk allowed David a moment to breathe. It gave him the space to reflect on the whirlwind of his career, the toll it had taken, and what truly mattered. For the first time in decades, he was not bound by the constant scrutiny of weekly television. Yet, this retreat also revealed just how much fame had become intertwined with his sense of purpose. Without the cameras, the stage, and the applause, David was left facing questions about who he was beyond the spotlight. In interviews following his departure, David spoke with a mixture of candor and vulnerability. He admitted that the relentless pressures of television had left him emotionally drained, and that he needed to focus on his own health and well-being. For a man who had always used humor as a shield against pain, acknowledging his struggles so openly was both brave and heartbreaking. But the road to peace was not easy. Adjusting to life after BGT meant confronting the silence that fame had once drowned out. There were moments of loneliness, times when he missed the energy of the stage and the joy of connecting with audiences in real time. Yet, there was also healing to be found in stepping away. Spending more time with his son Alfred gave him a new sense of purpose. Writing continued to offer an outlet, though at a slower, more reflective pace. His charity work also became a central part of his life once again. Despite the controversies, David's commitment to helping others never wavered. Whether it was through supporting children's literacy or raising awareness for mental health struggles, he continued to use his platform for causes larger than himself. In many ways, this work allowed him to reclaim the humanity that had been lost in the noise of scandal and fame. Still, the shadow of his past lingered. Even after leaving BGT, the public fascination with his private life did not disappear. Every new project, every rare public appearance, sparked speculation about whether he might make a comeback or whether his television career was over for good. For David, the question was no longer about fame, it was about balance. He had achieved more success than most could ever dream of, but at a price that few could endure. The heartbreaking reality is that David Walliams, the man who brought joy to millions, carried pain far deeper than many realized. His story is one of triumph and tragedy, of laughter and loneliness, of resilience and regret. It is a reminder that behind every smiling face on television, there may be struggles invisible to the audience. Today, as he continues his journey away from the limelight, David remains a symbol of both extraordinary talent and extraordinary vulnerability. His life is a testament to the highs and lows of fame and the human cost of living under constant scrutiny. For his fans, the hope remains that David will find peace, not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet moments of his own life. Because in the end, the greatest act of courage for David Walliams was not making millions laugh, but finally allowing the world to see the man behind the jokes, the man who, despite everything, still carries a heart capable of both breaking and healing.